Hi guys, today I'm bringing you a video on these. Perhaps not an obvious topic for a video, but the British Army shell dressing, or British military shell dressing, they weren't purely army issue, show up in quite a lot of photographs, certainly during the Cold War period. You see them taped to webbing and all sorts of things, so I thought we'd take a look at them. The design was first introduced, as far as I'm aware, in 1916. It was modified slightly in 1917 with the inclusion of an iodine ampule in a small cardboard tube inside the dressing, or inside the packaging rather. But this had disappeared by the Second World War. The design stayed essentially the same and was not only used by the Army, but also by Civil Defence, so the Home Office contracted for these as well, the Admiralty and the Air Ministry. In fact, I have an Admiralty example here. This is actually a post-war British Army, so War Office, I don't know if you'll be able to see that, Army Medical Department, and it's dated October 1957. This is a wartime Admiralty one. It's the Admiralty there. And then 1943, August 1943, Vernon and Company Limited, Preston. They were made by other Commonwealth nations as well, Canada, Australia, and an Australian version here, by way of comparison, which of course I have for use with my Australian Vietnam kit. It's not uncommon to see these taped to the butts of rifles or to web equipment, and that's actually 1942, dated April 1942. The majority of these I have are post-war. They came with a shell dressing bag, and they are all 1950s dated. And the design stayed essentially the same. So you have this outer khaki packaging, very similar to that which was first introduced in 1916, with a tie at the top, and then this seam here is stitched and easy to pull apart, so that you can get at the inner. Inside this there's a waterproof. I don't have any open, unfortunately, to show, but inside this is a waterproof packaging, and then inside that is the dressing. Here you can see the outer packaging of the shell dressing, the date stamp and so forth. If you wish to, you can pause the video here to read the instructions. The waterproof packaging is similar to, if I can dig it out here, I do have, where's it gone? A 1960s dated example. Ah, there it is. Couldn't see it for looking. Now this is very similar to what replaced these, or certainly supplemented them to start with, which is the Joint Services dressing, which was in use until recently. I think they've now been replaced. But this is dated December 1964, which is very faint there. I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there's a date stamp there. And the packaging is very similar to the Joint Services dressing, which would replace them, in that it's just this outer peel open packaging is the waterproof layer, and the dressing is just inside. And you have Armed Forces shell dressing, so it's no longer specific Admiralty or Army contract. This is now being produced as a Joint Services dressing. It's for all three services, but it doesn't yet have that nomenclature. And in the 1970s, the Joint Services dressing would be introduced and would begin to replace these, although obviously there are many stories of shell dressings, even of this vintage of Second War or even earlier, of this type being used in the Falklands War, and later even certainly in training. I've read of these being used into the 90s. So yeah, but this is sort of an interim design between the shell dressing and the Joint Services dressing, which came a bit later, which I will be doing a video on at some point. And here's the later type of shell dressing packaging. You can just make out the date stamp at the bottom, and again, if you wish to read the details, you can pause the video here. And these, of course, were certainly issued to a degree as personal issue, although the first field dressing was really intended for that. It's a larger dressing. The first field dressing contains two small dressings. This is one larger dressing. As I say, during the Cold War era, it's not unusual to see these taped onto belts or other parts of web equipment, or even rifles. And during the Second World War, prior to that, of course, you do see photographs occasionally of these tucked under helmet nets, and pieces of equipment, pieces of clothing, such as the trousers parachutists, had two pockets in the rear designed to each hold a shell dressing. So some personal issue there, as well as being issued in, as we'll see now, shell dressing bags. They were also intended to be carried in these shell dressing bags, which I will do a video on at some point separately as well. But I believe the contents of this was 12 shell dressings, and these would be carried by medical personnel for immediate treatment of wounds. The whole point of the first field dressing and the shell dressing is to patch you up in order to get you to a medical aid station, the regimental aid post, and then back from there. So it's just literally put it over whatever's bleeding, get it on nice and tight, try and stem the bleeding as much as possible to get someone back to the regimental aid post. So there we are, just a little bit of a look at the development of the British shell dressing, who had them, I say British Commonwealth really, and then the adaptation in the 60s, and then obviously they say they were supplemented and replaced in the 1970s. So I hope you found that interesting, as I always say. If you haven't already, check out the Facebook page. I've put a link in the description. If you like my videos and would like to see more, please consider subscribing, and obviously hit the notification, hit the little bell button there that will give you notifications of future uploads. And until next time, bye for now.